And welcome everybody to the magnetic fields and features section of the video, looking at the Sun-Earth environment here. We're looking at magnetohydrodynamic pressure, and we see a subsiding pressure here as the solar wind speed has been dipping. So we'll let this play all the way through again. You're going to see the majority of the pressure here showing up in the magnetotail as the plasma environment around planet Earth attempts to reach static equilibrium. So when you see the solar wind pressure drop here, the solar wind speed drop rather, you're going to see the pressure reach equilibrium with lower pressure on the bow shock region. That's this side of the planet facing the sun. You'll see less pressure here and more pressure in the magnetotail, an indication of a subsiding solar wind. So that's the last 4 hours there. The space weather modeling framework, Earth's magnetic moment from space. Next, looking at the heliospheric current sheet. Earth is in a South Pole-oriented current sheet. We don't expect any changes to happen here anytime soon. Keep in mind the magnetic environment can suddenly change. We'll be watching Sunspot 2943, which will be the latest named sunspot in the southeast. It's already beta class. We'll get to it momentarily. First, the GOES magnetometers, which have actually seen a recent divergence here. Around midnight local time for the GOES 17, we saw a dip in its magnetic field measurement and an increase in the GOES 16 magnetic field measurement. And here's the line of sight ecliptic plane field plot, the heliospheric current sheet from Earth's perspective as opposed to the top view ecliptic plane field plot view. Also, you can note the solar magnetogram. Quite a lot of activity here as solar cycle 25 ramps up and looks absolutely nothing like a grand solar minimum. Next, looking at the coronal hole line of sight plot, and you can see all kinds of South Pole-oriented coronal holes here stretching right across the solar equator. Those are the most geo-effective type of coronal holes, and this one down here is quite well defined. We'll show it next. Here's the full disk view. 193 angstroms is one of the best wavelengths to view coronal holes. And for you new viewers out there, there are protons blasting out of this coronal hole. So this is emitting protons. It's creating a high-speed solar wind. Will that wind reach Earth? We'll have to stay tuned for that for later videos. Let's take a close-up of it. Got some great filaments there to its south as well. And we did show a massive filamentary eruption on smashamash.com/smashteam. That's a public post, actually. You can go see the imagery of that if you like. Share with your friends and foes. Great imagery of that coronal hole as well as that filament. Thanks to the SDO 193 angstroms wavelength of ultraviolet light. So lots of protons coming out of there, as well as during that filament eruption. And it did spark a coronal mass ejection. We'll show you momentarily. For some reason, detected sunspot groups here is not animated. That's okay. We've got a new sunspot right here. So this is going to be Sunspot 2943, and that'll give us 5 named sunspot groups, all of beta class. So likelihood of significant solar flares here still quite high, higher than 50%. These sunspots, and indeed most sunspots in the past month or so, have been underperforming in terms of flare production. What say you about that? Do you have a theory as to why they're producing so few flares? So here's the southern hemisphere. You'll see Sunspot 2943, which is this area right here. You can see some umbrae forming there. I thought it would be named yesterday. It'll certainly get named today. It's quite well defined. We'll show you the close-ups of that in high res in our bonus features segment. So here's this northern group. That is 2940. That's still beta class. That's still capable of producing significant flares. It's got opposite polarity umbral fields. And here's 2941. That is the most likely culprit to produce major flares. The umbrae have been spreading apart from each other, which means you've got plasma stretching all the way across this. And we may see coronal mass ejections and solar flares associated with that group. Hence the high solar flare probability. And here's a full disk view. That's 1700 angstroms, part of the ultraviolet wavelength spectrum as well. So again, these sunspots have been largely underperforming here. Just some C-class intensifications over the past 3 days. That's the GOES 16 and 17 X-ray flux. No spikes in the proton flux of note. Those would be the relativistic particles that solar flares tend to send to Earth at relativistic speeds. In other words, a significant percentage of the speed of light. Next, we're looking at the subsiding of a coronal hole high-speed stream here. Current solar wind conditions, about 443 kilometers per second. Solar wind density, just under 5 protons per cubic centimeter. And that's very diffuse, folks. While space is not at complete vacuum, only 5 protons in a cubic centimeter is a very diffuse environment. That measurement's happening at Lagrange point 1, by the way. We'll show you where that is in a moment. First, the KP index, only at 1 geomagnetic calm conditions. Here's what's going on in the solar system. Let's forward this 1 week. And there's where we'll be in a week, about a day or two from the next full moon. And here's a star chart if you're wondering what's going on above your head. So am I. So I use in-the-sky.org. Once again, if you're up before dawn, you may see Mars, Venus, and Mercury rising ahead of the sun, especially if you have a low horizon to see the dim Mercury. And if you've got any imagery of that, let us know in the comments. We'll feature it on the channel. Next, your Lagrangian point coronagraphs. So at L5, that's where stereo A is located. L1 is where the LASCO SOHO C2 is located. And we've got a coronal mass ejection here. It's a quite interesting one. It has like a core feature in it. And we're expecting that to miss the Earth by a lot to the south and east. So that's just kind of happening as we're making the video here. It's not even complete yet. We may see additional CMEs. Again, this one not earthly directed. Thanks for having your YouTube feed directed to our channel. Congratulations on realizing it exists. Make sure you join us for our bonus features here at the Smash News Network. Least busted name in news.